Hi, everybody. Hi. My name is Carrie Lane. I'm the project investigator for this year's NEH grant. And on behalf of my co-PI, Dr. Stephen Dahlke, I want to welcome you here today. One of the coolest things about this year's grant is that we're going to be able to, we're going to gather and exhibit your writing and your poetry. And we're going to have an exhibit on April 16, 2015 of your work. We're also going to have a performance at QPAC of dance and singing and choral work and classical music, all of which are student-led. And today's event is very special because Professor Childers of the Department of English will be facilitating your ability to respond with creative writing and poetry to the art of genocide, and for inclusion in the exhibit on April 16th. So this is a very special writing workshop. It's our second of 4 writing workshops. It is an honor to have you here today and an honor to have Professor Childers, and let's give a warm welcome to her.
Okay, so first off, I wanted to just thank Professor Lane for giving me the opportunity to participate in this, because as many of you who know me know, I really value student participation. So this is really going to be about you. I want to hear from you, and I want you to share your writing and feel free and comfortable that this is going to be an environment where we're not going to be judgmental of your work. Okay? So the first question I think we need to ask before we even begin is, what is poetry? I put a handout in front of your, on your table for each of you, which has the standard definition of poetry, just the dictionary definition of poetry, which says a piece of writing in which the words are chosen for their sound and the images and the ideas they suggest, not just their obvious meaning. So sometimes when we think about poetry, we think, some people can think that it's even cryptic or difficult to understand. I have a lot of students that say that poetry is so difficult. That's because sometimes there's metaphors and things that are not so obvious. And then it says the words are arranged in separate lines. So in contrast to, say, prose, poetry is often lineated, though you can have a prose poem. And then it says often ending in rhyme. Well, we don't always see that poems rhyme, but some do. So what do you think of when you think of poetry? What comes to your mind? What's the first word?
Like a description of things?
A description, so that, okay, good. So like the vivid imagery kind of thing, okay? Anyone else? What comes to your mind? What's the first word? Emotion, absolutely. For so many people, it's about that emotional core of a poem. Now, when you think of emotion, do you think of personal emotion or just emotion in general? What kind of emotion?
It can be both. It can be general. It can be general from what you've experienced to others, and personal from what you feel. Yeah.
That's interesting. I like that. So it can be some sort of empathy that you feel towards others, or it can be your own personal sensitivity or emotion. Yeah, that's good. And we're going to talk more about that later. Anyone else? What comes to your mind when you think of the word poetry? What's the first word? Music. I was hoping somebody would say that. Yeah, poetry has often a musicality to it. Now, why did you say music?
There's always a rhythm to it.
Right.
Not just like in the way it's being said visually, if you look at it.
Right. So I like that. So the rhythm, not just in the way it's being uttered, but the way it's spaced out on a page. So maybe the blank space on the page. That's really interesting. So what I want you to do now is go through these other definitions. A lot of these are quotes about what a poem is by a lot of famous poets here. And I want you to very quickly read through them and circle the one that to you speaks of what a poem is. It just hits you. So I'll just give you like 2 minutes to read through those and then circle the one. Okay, so what did you circle? Does anybody have one? What did you circle?
A poem begins with a lump in the throat, a homesickness, or a love sickness. It is a reaching out towards expression, an effort to find fulfillment. A complete poem is one where the emotion has found its thought and the thought has found its words.
Great. So that's a very famous Robert Frost quote. Do you know his work? Does anybody read Robert Frost?
I've read like 1 or 2 poems by him since we've been walking through the woods on Snowy.
Right, right. So that kind of rural, New England kind of poet. So that's a really interesting quote that you've chosen because it goes back to the thing that we had said earlier about emotion, but it also brings up this issue of thought. So it's not just emotion, but it's also when emotion has found its thought. And an artist that we're going to be talking about later talks a lot about the way that thinking is the core of how we make art about something. Did anyone else pick a different one? Okay, what did you pick?
I picked two.
Oh, Danielle, I asked someone else. Okay, good.
William Wordsworth.
Okay.
Poetry is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. The emotion is contemplated till, by a species of reaction, tranquility gradually disappears, and an emotion kindred to that which was the subject of contemplation is gradually produced, and does itself actually exist in the mind.
Great, thank you. So that's the classic definition of the poetry coming out of the romanticism, the tradition of romanticism. And I think those of us are poets, whether we consider ourselves romantics or not, we understand this idea of spontaneous overflow of feelings. Does anyone here write regularly? They write poetry. Do you feel that experience of that spontaneous overflow of feeling coming out? Yeah, you can relate to that. Anybody write songs or make music?
Well, I write song lyrics, but I don't really make music.
So yeah, so you can feel that there. So you write music as well? You play music. So do you feel that spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling when you make music? So I think it is something that comes out in that act of making art. Anyone do visual art? No visual artists here. Huh, that's interesting.
Used to.
And you drum as well?
Yes.
Well, you used to, or you still do?
Some occasion.
Some occasion, okay. So what about, anyone else pick a different quote? Okay, Danielle?
Emily Dickinson, of course. I also picked another, but I'm not going to say that one. I'm going to say that for somebody else. I'll choose the Emily Dickinson one for now. If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. These are the only ways I know it. Is there any other way?
Good, and that's, that once again, that experience. We're hitting back to this experience of emotion, emotion and power, I think. So what then is the purpose of poetry?
Mine?
Well, just asking in general, what is the purpose of poetry? But let's hear from some other people, Danielle.
Exactly. Thank you.
So what is the purpose of poetry? Do you think? Go ahead. What's that? To express. Express and relate with others. I like that a lot. And I think that's, goes back to that idea of emotion and emotional connection. So it's not just about our emotions, it's also about how we connect with others. And then the other thing we're going to talk about is what is the poet's role in society. And by that, I mean, what is the job of the poet of society? What do we think a poet does as a job? First of all, do we think of poets as actually having occupations? What do we think of poets? Do they make money? How do they make money? Do poets make money?
Not much.
Not much, no. Usually they don't make much money at all. But then what is their role in society? What do they contribute?
He used Walt Whitman saying as an example. He said a poet's job, like aesthetically, is to let the people absorb him and he absorbs them back, and then you let go.
Wow.
So as a poet, you have to find a way to get to what you experience, put that and make poetry of that.
That's interesting. And then I like that idea of letting go at the end, of not carrying it with you. If you carry that burden with you, if you're feeling the world very intensely, like the way Walt Whitman describes his own experience, and then you don't let that go, that can bog you down and burden you. That's interesting. Anyone else on the role of the poet in society? Go ahead.
It can almost give the society that it's in a voice, because there's a lot of people who can't express themselves, who can't speak up. But if there's the poet is sort of that plays that role of speaking for other people.
I love that answer. And I think that that's really the core of what we're going to be talking about today, that idea of giving voice. I think you're absolutely right. And when we are giving voice as poets, we have to think about what that means and be ethical and honest about it when we are giving voice to others. So these are kind of the questions I'm interested in looking at today. We don't necessarily have to answer them because most of them don't have answers. But what is the relationship between poetry and suffering? We often think about poets as suffering or poets writing about suffering. That's sort of the cliche. And certainly poets also write about joy and love, but usually when we think about poets writing about love, it's often, the dark love poem, the sadness, the unrequited love, that kind of thing. So the other question we're going to look about, how can we write honestly and ethically about our own personal suffering and the suffering of others? And then this is very key for me. Does the artist or writer have a responsibility to bear witness to the suffering of others? Now, do we as artists or writers have a responsibility? And what are the limitations of looking from the outside in? Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is, so we're going to be talking about genocide. And this is the sort of standard definition of genocide. After the Holocaust, the United Nations created a new term, genocide, and defined it as any of the following actions committed with intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So we see that genocide is beyond an individual suffering. It's a collective suffering, and it's a directed attack at a group. Now, this is a big topic to write about. How do we, as poets who've never experienced this, write about it? How do we take this topic on? I think that it's a hard question, and we're going to try to find ways to approach it today. But the two artists that we're going to be talking about have done that. They've taken it on either from the outside perspective or from the inside, having experienced it. So we'll cover two different artists today. The first person we're going to look at is the Chilean artist Alfredo Jaar. And he definitely believed that the artist has a responsibility to bear witness. And he was particularly interested in what was happening in Rwanda in the 1990s, when many people, especially in the West, were ignoring what was going on. So we'll look at an art project that he created that serves to bear witness. This is the opening of his website. And it's interesting because he's a visual artist. And when I went to his website, I was really intrigued to see that he talks about poetry in his website. So he sees poetry as very important to that issue of bearing witness. He says, he begins with a quote by the poet William Carlos Williams. "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for the lack of what is found there. What does he mean by that, William Carlos Williams?
What happens?
Okay, so what does he mean by it's difficult to get the news from poems? What's the difference between getting the news and getting a poem?
Poems aren't really descriptive, so they can't really into details.
Right, so maybe you're not going to get the details and the facts of what actually happened in a particular event, but there's something else that you get in a poem. And what is that something else that he says that men die miserably every day for lack of?
Like you feel where he's coming from, the emotion, hurt and everything.
So getting the struggle, so that empathy. Excellent, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else on what is in poems that we don't get in the news? Well, interestingly, this artist was very interested in the relationship between news and art. And one of his projects, which is a really interesting take on the news, we're going to have Lauren come up and help us out on this. He was interested in what was not being said in the news. And so what he did was he took the covers of Newsweek and he juxtaposed them with what was actually happening in Rwanda. And you can really, through that, see the divide between what is being acknowledged in the media and sort of the forgotten story. So we'll start here. Okay, you might want to go closer so you can see. Yeah.
A plane carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi is shot down above Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. The death sparked widespread massacres targeting Hutu moderates and the minority Tutsi population in Kigali and throughout Rwanda. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, which had been encamped along the northern border of Rwanda, starts a new offense.
Thank you. That's beautiful reading. Okay, go ahead.
The interim Rwandan government flees Kigali for the town of Gitarama. Relief officials estimate that as many as 25,000 people have been killed in Kigali alone in the first 5 days of violence.
Okay, and we really see a juxtaposition there with the suicide of Kurt Cobain on Newsweek cover, and then 25,000 people have been killed alone already.
The United Nations Security Council Resolution 912 reduces the UN peacekeeping force in Rwanda from 2,500 to 270. 50,000 deaths.
You're doing a great job. This is fascinating. So now we have 50,000 deaths, and the Newsweek cover is better than vitamins. So.
At least 1.3 million Rwandans fled their homes. More than 250,000 refugees crossed the border to Tunisia, the largest mass exodus ever witnessed by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. 100,000 deaths.
So we have 100,000 deaths at this point, and we have the history of Richard Nixon.
The Rwandan Patriotic Front gains control of most of northern Rwanda. As killings continue, hundreds of thousands of refugees flee to Zari, Burundi, and Uganda. 200,000 deaths.
So we have 200,000 deaths. We're in Africa, but still not covering the genocide.
More than 30,000 bodies washed down the Kigera River, which marks Rwanda's border with Tanzania. The United Nations Security Council passes Resolution 918, authorizing the deployment of 5,500 UN troops to Rwanda. The resolution says acts of genocide may have been committed.
So there's an acknowledgement that acts of genocide may have been committed, and then we have Newsweek, men, women, and computers. Is he as cute as his email? Bet she'll love my war games.
The Rwandan Patriotic Front gains full control of Kigali and the airport. 300,000 deaths.
So now we have another historical cover, D-Day.
Deployment of the mainly African UN force is delayed due to the dispute over who will provide equipment and cover the cost for the operation. 400,000 deaths.
Okay, I think that covers pretty self-explanatory. Okay.
The United States argues with the UN over the quota of providing heavy armed vehicles for the peacekeeping force. 500,000 deaths.
So now we have the myth of Generation X, and we could probably relate to this because we see the same things, all these articles, the myth of Generation Y now, but the same kind of pop journalism.
The killings of Tutsis and moderate Hutus continues, even in refugee camps. 600,000 deaths.
Okay. So another piece, an issue about virtue and moral decline. So that's a little bit ironic.
France announces its plan to send 2,500 troops to Rwanda as its interim peacekeeping force until the UN troops arrive. 700,000 deaths.
Okay. So we have a sports cover.
With still no sign of UN deployment, the United Nations Security Council authorizes the deployment of 2,500 French troops in southwest Rwanda. 800,000 deaths.
Okay, so we're now at an 800,000 death toll, and we're going to go through the OJ, of course, covers.
The UN Rights Commission Special Envoy releases a report stating that the massacres were pre-planned and formed part of the systematic campaign of genocide. French troops established a so-called safe zone in the southwest of Rwanda. As the Rwandan Patriotic Front advances westward, the influx of displaced persons into the so-called safe zone increases from 500,000 to 1 million within a few days, 900,000 deaths. An estimated 1.5 million Rwandans flee toward Zari. More than 15,000 refugees cross the border every hour and enter the town of Goma, which becomes the largest refugee camp in the world. A cholera epidemic sweeps through the camps in and around Goma, killing an estimated 50,000 people more. The United Nations Security Council reaches a final agreement to send an international force to Rwanda. 1 million people have been killed. 2 million have fled the country. Another 2 million are displaced within Rwanda.
So at this point, 1 million people have been killed, and the cover is To Walk on Mars. Just this sort of, pop science piece.
Newsweek magazine dedicates the first cover to Rwanda.
Okay, so after 1 million deaths, Newsweek has its first cover. And this artist wanted to show the way that the news was ignoring, and he believes that it's very important for the artist to step into the place. And I think that's why he put that quote by William Carlos Williams at the beginning, about the death of how men die without access to what's in those poems. And I think that that's one of the core things of what he's trying to do with his work. And I want to thank Lauren for that wonderful reading. And it was very hard to read, as you can see. So let's give her a round of applause. Okay. So I have a student who some of you may recognize. This is Tracy Artist. She's one of our poets. She's actually at Queens College now, and she's studying history, specifically focusing on genocide and race, and she's minoring in Korean. So Tracy, much like the artist Alfredo Jaar, is interested in that idea of poetry bearing witness to suffering. So she wrote this piece, her own reflection on Rwanda. And now that you've heard the history of it, I think this piece will have even more significance.
Rainy season. It is April again. In the land we once called paradise, it is...
Here, let's let it... Yeah, it's not syncing. I think because it's very high res quality. It's very high quality video. Let's see if it...
Rainy season. It is April again. In the land we once called paradise, it is April. Where bodies laid forgotten, infrastructure built by the foreign landowners, our blood signed contracts we could not understand. Yes, it is April again. When new lives grow, rooted from the underbelly of our own, where men turned against men, loved ones murdered small ones, where small ones carried machetes, larger than their bodies, machetes. In
trying to get it to sync, but...
where small ones carried machetes, larger than their bodies, machetes. Imported from the Chinese, MK-16 rifles, USA. hand grenades given from our brothers, and while all the world watched in horror as these weapons supplied to us from these so-called martyrs butchered us, soiled our land, raped our women. As our bodies begin to fester, began to grow seeds, we remember it is April.
Okay, so that's a really phenomenal poem, and I think that, you know, it may be a little intimidating to think, okay, how am I going to write a poem about genocide? She clearly has done a ton of research on this topic, and this is something that's very deep to her. And so she is continuing to do research, and she's now at Queens College, so she's one of our former Queensborough students. So another way that we can think about writing about something that is maybe not the personal or so close to home is we can use this notion of ekphrasis, which is a Greek rhetorical tradition in writing that involves responding to art. Oftentimes, as you said earlier, description is poetry. Oftentimes using vivid description. In this way, we can reanimate art and we can participate in it. So we're going to practice some of that today to get into the minds of artists through their art. Okay? I think you want me to keep that up. Some people are writing it down. So meanwhile, what I'll do is while you're writing that down is I'm going to start passing out some paintings for your table. You're going to have to share these to a certain extent. So what I want you to do is we're going to start by practicing this. And you're going to need to share these paintings. So go ahead and pull the painting out. I'm not going to give you any biographical information first, because what I want you to do is actually just experience the work of art as you see it. Okay, so you're going to want to make sure these paintings stay in the middle, and you're all going to want to write. So what I want you to do for the first few minutes is you're going to describe the painting in your packet. Okay, we're back to this issue we talked about earlier. It's that poetry involves description, oftentimes imagery. So you don't have to use full sentences in a poem, but you can use full sentences if you're more comfortable. I just want you to describe what you see, and not just with your external eye, but with your internal eye, with your emotions. What emotions do you feel when you look at this poem? So just jot it down, and then what do you think the painting might mean in terms of interpretation, and offer an interpretation. So I want you to write silently for a few minutes, and then I'm going to want to hear back from you. So Samuel Bach, as you can tell from this handout, was an artist who survived the Holocaust, and he actually was quite a childhood prodigy as an artist, and his first exhibit was actually at the age of 9 in a Polish ghetto. So that's where, you know, his art came out of this space of despair from the beginning. Okay, and then he was sent to a labor camp, and you see on the back here where it says, on 27th of March 1944, 250 children from the labor camp HKP are sent to their death. Bach's mother takes advantage of the confusion in the camp to flee while Samuel hides under a bed in the living quarters of one of the camp buildings. A few days later, his father smuggles him out of the camp in a sack of sawdust. Outside, by a prearranged signal, he links up with a woman waving his mother's scarf. Samuel and his mother are forced to look for shelter, and then once again they are kept in a convent for a while. And he lost his father. So you see these images of this childhood and this, like someone said earlier, the loss of innocence in his paintings. Another fascination that he had was this painting, and he explained, or this photograph, I mean, and he explains why. He says, as I was working on my last series of paintings based on the well-known photo of the Jewish boy from the Warsaw Ghetto, I could not help reflecting on the countless millions of children that perish in man's senseless conflicts, wars, and genocides, past and present. I thought, what an unspeakable abuse of our young innocents, our little just ones. So did any of you notice this image in the paintings that you looked at, this photograph? Has anybody seen this photograph before?
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you see it?
Well, it's quite common in pictures that introduce holograms.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a common image. And so he was obsessed with this image, and he used it as an icon in his work, and in a very haunting way. So what were some of the pictures? What did somebody write about this picture with the blue thread? Did anybody write about that one? And can you see that image in there now that I've shown you the photograph? So how does that change your interpretation of this picture, knowing that he's playing off of that photograph? What do you think he might be suggesting? That's good. Yeah, absolutely. That sense of imprisonment, and you can see it in the physical nature in which the subject is constrained. Absolutely.
It struck me as a broken crucifix. So a lot of people guarding the concentration camps might consider themselves Christian, and that breaking of.
Yeah, and that was another. He played with religious iconography and symbolism in his work as well, and you're picking up on that beautifully. Anyone else? Right, absolutely. And so you get this multiplicity of religious iconography being played upon at the same time. So there's a lot of depth in his work. And so on a surface reading, you can absolutely get that emotional essence. There's no doubt about it. You know, when you see this, you see suffering. But when you look into the biography and you understand what he experienced, then you can start to pull back those layers and see that this painting is more than what you may initially think. Okay, and this is another one where you see the iconography of the boy used again. You see the image doubled. So what do you view of this one? There's some greenery in there. Any thoughts? Go ahead.
I wrote that two people surrendering, one with an identity, one without.
Oh, wow. That's profound. Did you hear that? So 2 people surrendering, one with an identity, one without. That is the beginning of a poem. You've got to keep going with that. That is interesting. Go ahead.
I had a comment on this one too. I had this one here. It's interesting because the one on the bottom, it looks like they're both just helpless. Notice that both of their hands also have holes that look exactly like bullet holes.
Right, right.
It's like they're being on target or something. So I've written something for that too. You do not know more names. They hatch only cracked eggs. To you they come. Listen. Testimony is dead. Call to a catacomb. That you will never remain. These your blood has still reigned.
Wow, that line, testimony is dead, is very profound. So that idea, and I think that that's something I really wanted to hit on, so I'm glad that you said that, is there are some things that no matter how hard we try, we can't really testify to the depth of it. We can't. Though that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, because that's part of what allows us to connect with others, is trying. But you know, there is a degree to which our writing can never capture the suffering. Anyone else on this one?
The surroundings looks to be abandoned by civilization.
Yeah.
It looks like a sort of archaeological artifact.
Yeah.
So, allowing that this civilization or tribe might have built that. They're gone now. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So there's this idea of this being, thank you, about this being this archaeological remnant in history past and lost and forgotten, and this greenery growing around, and your interpretation of it makes it not as hopeful as one might think of when they think of like greenery representing life. You're looking at it as like this forgotten story in a way. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I actually thought about like two people getting caught and like in the middle of nowhere, and then like you finding them and they don't really care because they realize who they are.
Wow. So there's this. So you're thinking about that relationship and that story of the characters, and that's another way when you're responding to art, is you can actually, you know, give life to the actual characters, the subjects in the painting, and tell a story. And that's when you go down a more narrative path rather than a lyrical path. Okay, so now that we know the story, does anybody have any different interpretations of this? Now we had saw that this one we had said, you know, it represents that loss of innocence and that childhood, and I think that that was a great interpretation. How does that change now that we know his background? In a lot of ways, we kind of hit it, didn't we? Go ahead.
This picture probably like things that he had to leave behind because he was just a child and he had to go to these camps, so these could just be remnants of what was left in the house when he was born.
Yeah, absolutely. These remnants of what was left behind. Absolutely.
Even look at the teddy bear's eyes. You see, it's a shock near in the headlights expression. So
Yeah.
The way a child would react there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the color in this painting is just so bright. Yeah.
I was wondering if that was a deer or something. No, that's natural.
And so then we have this one as well, which is very similar with the title Damage. And then the final one, Ancient Memory. And once again, we see that boy, but he's here. And what do you think about this one?
Potential suicide.
Okay, that image of suicide, that's an interesting point. Yeah, he's on the edge. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Anyone else?
It looks like a building that crumbled through time. The ancient memory would be what he forgot. So what crumbled away represents what he lost.
Right, and I think that goes back to your point you made about the other one as well.
It also looks like a person being face down like this.
Mm. That issue of surrendering, yeah, that position of surrendering. It was, the Queensboro Art Gallery had an exhibit of Samuel Bach's paintings, and being in the gallery with all these paintings of this image of this boy, and there's so many more that he's done, and they're all very haunting. Just being in it and having my students write about it was what inspired me to bring these paintings today, because my students wrote some of the best work I've ever, and they just wrote it so quickly, because I think there's a lot of emotion conveyed in these paintings. So one other project, and this is a very different kind of project. This is a project that someone I work with did. She did a project that I was just in London, and Kate Pullinger, she's an artist that I'd worked with, a writer I had worked with in the past. She was doing this commemoration of World War I in England, and I was just there during the commemoration in England, and it was really interesting to see all the different types of memorials, and even like when I was at an event and they were like, we're going to have a moment of silence at this, event, and all these different ways in which people remember. And so one thing that she did was she came up with this project, which is very participatory in nature. And so she says, on platform 1 of Paddington Station in London, there is a statue of an unknown soldier. He's reading a letter. On the 100th anniversary of the declaration of war, in a year crowded with official remembrance and ceremony, we invited everyone in the country to pause, take a moment or two, and write that letter. All the letters the soldier received are published here, creating a new kind of war memorial, one made only of words. So she definitely got people outside of the country. It ended up not just being people in England. So when you go on the website, you see that read the letters he received. And he received 21,439 letters. So that was a crowdsourced public arts project to commemorate World War I. And what I find interesting about this piece is that it says to me, it goes back to when I said the definitions of poetry up here, where it says, Pablo Neruda says, I have always maintained that the writer's task has nothing to do with mystery or magic, and that the poet's, at least, must be a personal effort for the benefit of all. The closest thing to poetry is a loaf of bread or a ceramic dish or a piece of wood lovingly carved, even if by clumsy hands. What I like about that idea, it's the idea that poetry is a democratic art and that we can participate in it. And even if our hands are clumsy, that we can do it and we can make something. And so she included children, for instance. You know, and of course, children are going to be clumsy writers. And the child says, "We will remember them. Dear friend, thank you for fighting for our country. Thank you for saving people like the Queen of England. I hope you did not die. Love from Archie." So you can see that there are darker and more contemplative letters than Archie's, but this idea of giving voice to something that is not alive. This monument, this sculpture is obviously not alive, but giving voice to it connects back to what Lauren had said earlier about poetry being a way of giving voice. So you can go through that project and see it at some point. Now what we're going to actually do is we're going to finish up with a writing exercise and then share. But I want to talk about this issue too of like when we are writing, that it's also about the art of the question. It's about thinking about things. And that's what I hope that you as writers do in all of your writing, that you use writing as a way to question things and to remember that there's not always going to be cut and dry solutions, and that poems are messy, and that poems that live and dwell in the question are often the strongest. Poets and writers don't necessarily have answers to the world's problems, but they definitely have a good way of questioning them and digging into them and going deeper. And the good poets and artists aren't afraid to do that, and musicians as well. So I want to read this interpretation of Samuel Bach's work, which talks about his work as being about the art of the question. Exploring, reworking this range of cultural, religious, and personal metaphors, Bach produces a visual grammar and vocabulary that privileges questioning. And I think we began to unpack that visual grammar and vocabulary as we worked through his painting. His works ask, how does a fragmented, murdered world cohere? How should we now interpret the milestones of Western civilization? What can traditional Jewish and Christian symbols, stories, ceremonies, convictions possibly mean in a century that has witnessed the Shoah and countless other catastrophes? Why should we and how do we now remember the children murdered by Nazi hatred? Why should, how does facing past atrocity prompt us to confront present innocent suffering? And how does our involvement in political, social, economic, and religious systems implicate us in the suffering of so many? Bach's visual questioning has become a consuming passion. Past, present, and future all fall subject to an interrogation intended to interrupt. So I think that that's about that idea of questioning. We want to question in our art. Okay, so what I want you to do as a writing exercise now, and I'm really going to ask some of you to share this with us, you can choose one type of ekphrasis. So the first one is choose one of the works of art we've looked at, one of the Samuel Bach pieces. You can even think back to the stuff that we looked at about Rwanda, and write a lyrical poem or a prose poem, that's like a piece of prose that has more of a poetic attention to language, that reflects on the painting and or gives voice to the character. Now, if you started with your description that you did on your painting and you really liked it, just keep going. Keep going with that and turn it into a full-length poem. Option number 2 is to write a poem, and when you talk about the process of writing or painting as you describe and reflect on one of the works of art we've looked at. So in this case, you're going to think about the artist and maybe what's going through the artist's head in the act of making. So try to write yourself into the artist's imagination as you explore what he or she may have been thinking during the creation of the work of art. Option number 3, this is another memorial. So I was thinking along the lines of the work that Kate Pullinger does, to write a letter to or from this woman in this sculpture from the Holocaust Memorial at Miami Beach. And then option number 4, write a poem that begins with a question inspired by your aesthetic experience of one of the paintings by Samuel Bach. Example, why do people suffer? Then follow the question wherever it takes you. So you might want to just ask, why would this happen? And then just keep going. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to write something, and then I'd like a few of you to share. Okay?
Hello, world. Hi, everybody. Hi. This is I chose option 4. It's called Why. And here's my poem about it. It's a question saying, why are people suffering? But I'm doing it in the form of we rather than people, because that sounded too broad. Alrighty, here we go. Why? Why must we suffer? Suffer at the expense of others, others who made decisions that reveal our desolate fates, fates that determine exactly who we are. Are we merely a part of a battle that masquerades as a game which looks like fun but deadly, deadly omniscient but not ours to decide. Hold on, it's not over yet. Decide from the results of others who suffer for mistakes they never intended to make them pawns in this madness which is imminent like death of a common foe that is not who he is. Is that why we suffer?
Thank you. Thank you. I like how you end that with a question as well. So you begin with a question and you end with a question. Would anyone else like to share their work?
The name of my poem is entitled, Why is Life So Cruel? Life is so cruel. Why is it so, one will ask? Because of the ability of one to think they are more significant than the other. Because of the ability to think they are more significant than his or her fellow human being. Many are thrilled by another's suffering. The political system takes away a basic human right. Many love to take away another living person's life. The disgust and complete scorn many of us receive from seeing this. But still, the powers that be fail to hear our outcries. That's it.
Thank you. Once again, we have a lot of people asking questions.
All right, I did option 1. So, blinded by the hate, not a time for play, bare hands raised, not a toy to catch, but a bullet to my chest. Not a dream to chase, judged by my race, lost and hopeless, I forget my place.
Ooh, excellent. Thank you.
My poem is called Damage, just like one of the photos. How can you feed us with lies and deceive us? How can you make us believe that we were gaining something but giving nothing? Hurt, battered, the sounds of cries, laughter, betrayal, and evil eyes. Nazis, the leaders of evil. We are human just like you, but sweeter. On our knees, begging for food and life, blinded by our future and the cells with no lights. Heading towards death with no clue in sight. Just pray to our deaths and hope things go right.
Wow, thank you. And you use that image of the blindfold
Yeah.
in the painting. Excellent. Okay.
My option is 1. Fine, I surrender, but shoot me, hang me, kill me, because this suffering isn't life worth, but being in heaven will.
Ooh, I like the tone of that one. Excellent. You kind of brought it with a different tone rather than being this vulnerable passive. It's almost this act of defiance. Very interesting interpretation.
I did mine on Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda. Y'all can hear me, right? Okay.
Maybe a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay, my poem, I did option number 1. Mine is... Okay, my poem is Genocide. Killing of innocent people, cleansing the earth, erasing the race. Mother, father, sister, brother, wife, husband, children. 100 days of hiding, shooting, dead bodies, rape, virus, no home, no food, no one left. Kill me now, or just let me live. Save me, Lord. What else do I have to give? Everyone for me is gone. I give up. Kill me now.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I chose option number 4, and I picked it right for the presented question. Why do we suffer? This is called the why.
I like that.
The entailment of remembering. Into some retrospect we fall. The human, exposed to suffer. visits the spirit never dead. Creativity, ambition, from destitute ground they've shed oomph, comprised of tattered emotions, the brave, inevitable ones. The why is a great beginning, which has kept flesh recovering through all days and predicaments at the befall of tragedies. So we rise with remembering into introspection as well. The human, ensnared to suffer, shall be visited theretofore. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Wow. Thank you, Christian. And I saw Lauren was going to.
How does a fragmented, murdered world cohere, finding ways to right all of their wrongs? Blinded and incoherent, or is it here and I can't feel it? How do you take away from me when I have so little to give? Like, how do I keep finding when I lost the will to live? Now, Father, Father, if you hear me, and if you even exist, give me something to look for, give me something to work with. You have planted your seed, and now I am your tree. How does a world cohere when they can't even see? Let our vines intertwine and let our meadows clear, to start over a new garden, repair the damage, and mend the fear.
Wow. That was a powerful poem and also a wonderful, phenomenal delivery. Thank you so much. This is your last chance. Well, I wanted to thank you all for coming today and sharing your work. And I really, how would they go about submitting this work or getting it to be part? Do you want to?
Through you.
Through me? So, okay. So then we should probably give my email address. So if you want to submit this work, you can send me an email.
Now, these poems will be included in the exhibition in the spring. So all the work you did today can be submitted to Professor Childers for inclusion in this exhibit. And everybody is, of course, welcome to come to the exhibit and see your work on the walls. So this is really great. Take advantage of this. Your poems are really wonderful, and we want to share these with everybody in the exhibit.
And it's really important to take opportunities like this to get your work out there. You know, it's a great thing to have on your creative resume. And we also run a student literary journal in the spring, so you would also perhaps want to submit some of your work to that. And I wanted to let you know that next week, at October 15th, there's going to be another Creative Writing Club meeting, and we're going to be continuing to talk about the work that Professor Lane is doing with the grant over the semester, so I hope you can join us for that. It's going to be in M123 if you'd like to come. And if you want to, and we're going to be talking about music and writing.
And another possibility, we would like poetry on the walls, and we're going to have poetry on ribbons falling from the sky, but we can also have spoken word. We'll have a video monitor right out here where you can record yourself, and we can have a loop of your poems, spoken word. And maybe some live, actually, at the opening reception. So,
yeah.
I do have this takes 3 minutes, a survey about what happened today. And so your feedback will be really valuable to us, and I'll put a badge on each table. Those of you who are my students, if you could give me your lab cards, and I can check off on those.